Making a study of a painter's work is what today's video is about. For me, it's not about creating a carbon copy of a painting. It's about bridging the gap between the masterwork and my own work, thinking about the goals of my personal work, what I love about this painting, and how I can learn from it. What I think is the most magical about a Velázquez is the way that, from afar, they look so insanely real, and then you get up close, and you can notice how loosely they're painted, how each stroke seems effortless, almost abstract, yet placed so perfectly to form a compelling image. This is something I really want to achieve in my own work, and here's my attempt at an interpretation of his work, Apollo and the Forge of Vulcan. Poster studies are a trial run for the painting. On a small piece of primed paper, I get my idea out and I try to learn from it. I didn't love how this one came out in the end, but in the middle I thought there was something really interesting going on. I didn't like how dull the background looked, how the facial proportions were pretty much all wrong, and I think it was partly because I started from this kind of neutral purple base, and that made the painting look dim, and that's not really what I'm trying to achieve. Moving on to the final canvas, I made my drawing, and the drawing always starts out rough, and then it gets refined further with an ink wash at the end so I can have a really strong understructure and not get lost while I'm worrying about value and color and all the other trials of painting. One really kind of complicated part of painting is understanding that vibrancy and transparency are interlinked. When you paint with a transparent wash, you're going to get a more vibrant color versus when you just add more white to a color. Eventually I'm going to make a video demonstrating this, but because I didn't like how dull my poster study looked, I came up with this solution that I call spot toning. Basically, I've already planned which areas of the painting I want to be which color. You know, I know where I want the vibrant green to go, the pinks and the purples, and the subsequent layers that I add over this bright base will have more vibrancy showing through. I love it when paintings glow like a jewel, and at the same time, it's really important to tone your canvas, especially when you're trying to paint with high contrast. The main purpose of toning your canvas is that when you start from a middle tone, you can place the light and you can place the darks, rather than avoiding the parts of the canvas that you want to be light. You can just add a lighter color there, and suddenly you're in control. Because I never tried this technique before I started it on my canvas, I really thought that this looked horrible, and I felt like I lost the structure of my drawing. I felt like everything was all over the place. I didn't know how the first pass was going to come out, so I just didn't film the first pass, which I regret doing now. But once I started redefining the shapes, things started to come alive, and I loved what I made. Going into the second pass, I started by oiling in over my dried painting. One thing I didn't love about the first pass is how sticky it looked, which I think mainly came from using too much medium in my paint. Because I used so much medium, there were a lot of beads and blobs, which you can see me scraping away here. It's really important to always apply oil to your painting before you scrape it. This way, the bits of paint just ball up onto your palette knife and don't get dusted into the air. I don't use any toxic pigments like cadmiums or cobalts, but if you really love those colors, you probably shouldn't scrape your paintings just to be safe. Since I wanted the painting to be super vibrant, I'm concerned about the surface. I want the glazes to glide easily over the painting and not get bumpy and pool up in places, which, if your painting's too textured, that can happen. I always work from left to right, background to foreground, and at this point I'm really pushing the darks in the background here, unifying the colors so that there's less brightness showing through, and I really like how Apollo's halo is shaping up here. Apollo is an interesting god. In the Iliad, he's kind of like the enemy, I guess, helping the Trojans. He's always cursing people, always dispensing vengeance. In this painting, he's telling Vulcan that Aphrodite has been cheating on him, which, I mean, no dip, right? The Apollonian and Dionysian are philosophical concepts derived from Nietzsche's Birth of Tragedy, representing two opposing forces in art and human psychology. The Apollonian relates to rationality, order, self-discipline, the drive to individuate, while the Dionysian relates to intoxication, spontaneity, emotions, the drive to merge. And Nietzsche didn't think that one was better than the other. His argument was that culture requires this tension between these natures. Like light and shadow, neither is visible without the other to define it. When most people are first introduced to this framework, they quickly self-identify as one or the other, usually whichever sounds more flattering to their ego. But the more productive question is, which nature do you systematically undervalue, and what does that cost you? Where have you been so Apollonian that you've missed something alive and important? Where has your Dionysian side created wreckage that structure could have prevented? I think it's fun and can spur some really good self-work to reflect on this concept, but for me, I think it's about realizing that you need both things, and you're like a silly guy balancing on a tightrope. Sometimes you need to go right, sometimes you need to go left, and you gotta kind of stay centered. So here I'm adding layers of color to the background, and I'm starting out with this magenta color and just kind of globbing it on at first and then blending it out later. And the medium I'm using is a mix of Galkid Light and Gamsol, 50-50, and I find that this mix just works perfectly, and it also doesn't really bother me. You know, sometimes using straight up Galkid, the fumes can give me a headache, but this is nice, and I'm really probably adding too much here. It's good for this stage though, but I think that my goal of kind of shifting the texture has just kind of turned into enhancing that texture, which I'm not really mad at. I didn't want the background to be flat. And then here I'm mixing colors, and it's important to note that when you add titanium white to any color, it's going to get a lot cooler. So as I go lighter, I also add more warm tones. So like I'm adding more yellow to these greens to shift them warmer. And I'd do the same thing with a pink. I'd add more red, which, you know, warm colors are just more yellow. Cool colors are more blue, is the basic answer to that. It's a little bit more complicated than that. And I really love this, I think it's called Phthalo Turquoise by Winsor Newton. It's one of my favorite pigments. I think it's so cool. I mean, my name's Evan Cyan for a reason. It's one of my favorite colors. And yeah, I often feel like that tightrope walker when I'm mixing paint. It's so easy for the paint to just get so dark so fast, and too light too fast, and you're constantly adding a little bit of this, a little bit of that. It's kind of like cooking. And, as you can see, as I'm moving on to the magentas, I'm maybe going to reach for that red. Maybe I didn't hear. Oh, yeah. But I probably should have. So now I'm going in with a super small brush, and I'm delicately placing the strands of hair. I usually like to start with the darks and go into the lights, but here, now that my background has dried, I'm able to just get some of those highlights that I couldn't get before. And this is definitely my favorite part of painting, is the finishing steps. I'm also highlighting the leaves in his laurel crown and sort of emphasizing the shifts, the blues that are in between the greens and the purples, so that it makes this kind of abstract gradient across the realistic figure, which is something I love. I love an abstract application of color over something figurative. Getting into that chin, I think I fully didn't film me doing the eye at all because it was so difficult, and I kept going back and forth. But I'm really proud of the way those eyelashes turned out. And under the chin, I wanted there to be some heat, some, imagined reflection coming off of his toga, which is an even redder pink. And I really like how the light falls on, I guess, his sideburn area. I think it's a really interesting moment. And there I just messed up and brushed it away. One of the good things about oil is that you can always just rub away a mistake. And here I'm doing some more modeling on the toga, which I think got a little bit too light and too lost. I also really love these silicone brushes, which it's just a piece of plastic that's flexible on a brush head, and you can really precisely just cut away the oil. And I find that really helps when you make a mistake too. Another thing that's so nice about working in these layers is that it gives you a chance to fix drawing mistakes, which are still all over this painting, but I think that's fine. That's why it has life to it, is all its little quirks. And then here, I'm kind of just pushing back a lot of these highlights. I mentioned before how sometimes the texture can get in the way of a very smooth glaze, but also sometimes the glazing can highlight the texture in a way that looks really cool as well, which I think is happening on some of these highlights on the upper part of the arm. Really spending a lot of time getting that shadow to start to shift in tone, ultimately making something that looks better than the layer underneath it, and hopefully has a higher contrast as well. You'll notice that sometimes I'm spreading a wash of paint across an area and then going back in with a smaller brush to push and pull things out. And I find that this really helps a lot. The wash of paint pushes back the values, and then later I can reestablish them or leave them as they are in those areas. Sometimes when you're painting, you can go too far, you can go too dark, or you can go too light, and you can go too vibrant. So having that tone to just reset everything helps you make better decisions. I also think painting wet into wet, which is really what I'm doing by putting that little wash down, is part of what makes oil painting so interesting. It allows you to make these really subtle shifts in value and to really gradate areas a lot better than you could with other mediums. This technique is also called couching, which I think to couch something means to generalize. So this idea that the overall wash is generalizing the colors is a good way to think about it. I think the iconography of the pointed finger up while you're making a point is kind of interesting. And now it's kind of like this meme with the nerd glasses emoji and the, well, actually. And I think part of the drama of this scene is that Apollo is coming into his Festus's forge, and he's saying, well, actually, your beautiful wife has been cheating on you with the man that you're making armor for right now. And that's so Apollo of him. Dionysus wouldn't care if Aphrodite's cheating, he would probably want to join in. Whereas Apollo is dispensing justice. I tried to look up the full myth. I still don't really understand Apollo's reasoning. It kind of feels like he's being just a messenger here, and he's just telling people, hey, come on, this is happening. Maybe don't make him that armor. I don't know, I always really liked Apollo as a god before I knew too much about him, but the more I know about him, the less I like him. He's done some pretty messed up stuff. Don't even get me into that story of that girl he turned into a tree. Yeah, that's really messed up. Adding this final little glaze and going back and adding some small texture, I'm feeling really happy with what I have here, but ultimately I don't really know if it's the original vision I set out on. I'm finding that I'm painting so thin that there are certain areas where I can't really control that full gradient. And for my next painting, I want to try to paint a thicker underlayer and then do a thin glaze over that instead of have all the layers be so thin. And now here I'm varnishing it, and it's really important to varnish in a thin layer and just spread it over. It looks really cool when you pour varnish from the bottle onto the painting, but that's not the best for your painting because it can pool up and it can dry weird. And I'm happy to say that this painting has dried fantastically. And yeah, here's just a recap of where we started. I love looking at these images and taking progress pictures. I think it's great for your development as an artist. And if you liked the video, please leave a like, a comment, a subscribe, hit that bell thingy. I'm also going to have prints of this work up on my website. So if you want to support me, they come in postcard sizes, a little cheap, $4 postcard, or you can buy a larger print to help support me. And yeah, thanks for watching. There's definitely going to be more to come. I have a lot of things planned.